the Alliance burns. The conference room smelled of recycled air and bitter coffee. Admiral Chin sat at the polished table, watching the holographic display flicker with star charts and fleet positions. Around her, representatives from the Vakreen Empire and the Salathi Collective shifted in their seats, their translators humming softly. "The Krell assault fleet will reach the outer colonies in 48 hours, said Ambassador Thras, his chitinous plates clicking as he leaned forward. "We need the human defense fleet at the Tertian junction. Now." Chin nodded slowly. The Alliance had held for 12 years, ever since the Krell had begun their expansion across the galactic arm. Humanity had joined willingly, contributing ships and soldiers to hold the line. The Vakreen provided heavy weaponry. The Salathi brought their legendary tactical minds. Together they had pushed the Krell back 3 times. "Our fleet will jump within the hour," Chin said. "But our supply lines are stretched thin. We'll need support from your logistics corps." Thras exchanged a glance with the Salathi representative, a floating jellyfish-like creature named Orivex. Something passed between them, something Chin couldn't quite read. "Of course," Orivex said, its voice resonating through a speaker embedded in its containment suit. "We will coordinate all resources." The human fleet arrived at Tertian Junction ahead of schedule. 200 ships, from nimble corvettes to the massive carrier Indomitable, dropped out of faster-than-light travel in perfect formation. Captain Rodriguez stood on the bridge of the Indomitable, studying the tactical display. "Krell's signatures detected," called out the sensor officer. "Multiple contacts. At least 300 vessels." Rodriguez felt his stomach tighten. The intelligence reports had said 150, maybe 200 at most. But 300? The numbers didn't add up. Where are the Vakreen? Where's the Salathi Second Fleet? The communications officer shook her head. "No response on any channel, sir. We're alone out here." The Krell ships descended like a swarm. Their vessels were ugly things, all exposed reactors and jutting weapons platforms, built for overwhelming force rather than elegance. The human fleet moved to engage, their captains shouting orders, their crews working with practiced efficiency. Then the trap closed. From behind the asteroid field, hidden until this moment, came another 200 Krell vessels. And from the edge of the system, where the Vakreen fleet should have been, came nothing but silence. The communications channel suddenly filled with encrypted Vakreen transmissions. Not to the humans but to the Krell. Rodriguez understood instantly. His hands gripped the armrest of his command chair hard enough to make his knuckles white. "They sold us out," he whispered. The battle was a slaughter. Human ships fought with desperate courage, their railguns spitting tungsten rounds, their missile racks firing until they ran dry. The Indomitable took hit after hit, its armor buckling, its corridors filling with smoke and screaming. Rodriguez ordered the evacuation, watching his crew flee to the escape pods even as he stayed at his post. The last thing he saw before the reactor breach tore through the ship was the tactical display. 197 human vessels destroyed. 3 corvettes fleeing toward deep space. He hoped they would make it home. Someone needed to warn Earth. They did make it home, barely. The corvette Defiant limped into Earth orbit 4 days later, its hull scarred by plasma burns, half its crew dead from radiation exposure. The captain, a young woman named Kamala Singh, stood in front of the United Nations Assembly and told them everything. "The Vakreen and Salathi made a deal with the Krell," she said, her voice hollow. "They gave them our fleet positions, our supply routes, everything. In exchange, the Krell promised to let them keep their core territories. We were the sacrifice that bought them peace." The chamber erupted. Delegates shouted, demanding action, demanding revenge. But Fleet Admiral Zhao, the oldest serving officer in the human military, raised his hand for silence. "How many ships do we have left?" he asked. The answer came from the naval secretary. 43 combat-ready vessels. Another 60 in various stages of construction. Our shipyards at Luna and Mars are still operational. Zhao looked around the room, meeting the eyes of generals and politicians, scientists and strategists. He saw their fear, their anger, their sense of betrayal. "Good. They would need all of that. Then we start building," he said quietly. "Not the ships they expect. Not the tactics they've seen. The Vakreen and Salathi think we're broken. The Krell think we're prey. We're going to show all of them what happens when you betray humanity." In the following weeks, Earth went dark. Every transmission ceased. Every trade route closed. Human colonies scattered across dozens of systems received coded messages and began their own preparations. The galaxy watched and waited, wondering if humanity would surrender or simply fade away. They did neither. In hidden shipyards deep in asteroid belts, in facilities buried under the ice of Europa, in stations orbiting dead stars that no one bothered to chart, humanity began to build. Not the ships their former allies had seen. Not the weapons the Krell expected. Something new. Something terrible. Admiral Chin, who had survived the battle at Tertian Junction by sheer luck when her flagship's reactor core had failed before the Krell could destroy it, stood in one of those shipyards now. She watched the construction drones work, assembling something that looked more like a geometric nightmare than a ship. "Will it work?" asked the engineer beside her. Chin smiled, and there was no warmth in it. "It will. And when it does, they'll wish they'd never heard of Earth." Silent fury. The Vakreen celebrated their victory with traditional fire songs that echoed across their homeworld's crimson sky. Ambassador Thras stood on the balcony of the Imperial Palace, watching the flames dance in the ceremonial braziers below. The war was over. The Krell had their territory, carved from what used to be human space. The Vakreen kept their mineral-rich worlds. The Salathi maintained control of the trade nexuses they'd held for centuries. Everyone won. Except the humans, of course, but that was the price of survival in a hostile galaxy. "You seem troubled," said General Karvik, joining Thras on the balcony. The old warrior's plates were scarred from a dozen campaigns, his eyes still sharp despite his age. "I keep thinking about the humans," Thras admitted. "They've gone silent. No transmissions, no trade requests, no diplomatic protests. Nothing." Karvik clicked his mandibles in what passed for a laugh among his people. "What did you expect? We crushed them. They're probably still counting their dead, trying to figure out how to rebuild with their 43 remaining ships. Give them another decade and maybe they'll have enough vessels to defend a single system." Thras wanted to believe that. He really did. But something gnawed at him, a feeling he couldn't quite name. In all the intelligence reports he'd read about humans, one thing stood out. They never went quiet when they were beaten. They argued, they negotiated, they fought tooth and nail for every advantage. Silence wasn't surrender for them. It was something else. 6 months after Tertian Junction, the Krell outpost at Rigel 7 simply vanished. One day it was there, a sprawling military complex housing 15,000 soldiers and a full battle group. The next day the regular check-in transmission never came. When the Krell sent a scout ship to investigate, they found nothing but debris and radiation. No survivors. No distress signals. No warning. The Krell commanders blamed pirates or internal sabotage. The outpost was on the edge of their new territory, after all, far from the core worlds. These things happened in war. They reinforced the nearby stations and moved on. Then 3 more outposts went dark in a single week. This time, the Krell sent a full investigation fleet, 20 warships packed with sensors and elite troops. They jumped into the system where the 4th outpost had been and found the station torn apart. But more importantly, they found something else. Scorch marks on the asteroids nearby that didn't match any known weapon signature. Strange geometric patterns burned into the metal, as if something had carved them with surgical precision. The fleet commander, a massive Krell named Throker, studied the data with growing unease. He'd fought in hundreds of battles, faced dozens of species, but he'd never seen damage like this. It was too clean, too perfect. Whatever had done this hadn't been trying to destroy the outpost, it had been dissecting it. "Pull back to the core systems," he ordered. "And send word to the Vakreen. We need to talk." The emergency council convened on the neutral station at Kelver Prime. Thras represented the Vakreen Empire. Orvex spoke for the Salathi Collective. The Krell sent 3 war chiefs, their bulk making the conference room feel cramped and dangerous. 8 outposts destroyed in 2 months, said Throker, his voice a deep rumble. No warning. No survivors. Whatever's doing this moves fast and strikes hard. Pirates, suggested one of the Salathi advisors, its tendrils waving dismissively. Or perhaps the Nareen Syndicate testing new weapons. No. Throker slammed his fist on the table, making it shudder. The Nareen don't have this kind of technology. No one does. These attacks are coordinated, surgical. Someone is hunting us. Thras felt his blood chill. You think it's the humans? The room fell silent. Orvex's containment suit hummed as it processed the suggestion. Impossible, it said finally. We destroyed their fleet. They barely had enough ships left to defend Earth itself. How could they? We assumed they were broken, Thras interrupted. We assumed they would negotiate or surrender. But they went silent instead. What if they were building? Karvik, who had joined the Vakreen delegation, shook his head. Building what? We have their ship specifications. We know their technology. Even if they've been working non-stop for 6 months, They couldn't have more than 100 vessels by now. We have thousands. Then where are they? Throker demanded. If not the humans, then who? The answer came 2 weeks later in the most brutal way possible. The Salathi colony at Ephra 3 was their pride. A water world terraformed over centuries, home to 3 million civilians and the collective's primary research facilities. The orbital defense network was state-of-the-art, with automated weapons platforms and a permanent garrison of 50 warships. The attack lasted 17 minutes. The human fleet appeared without warning, dropping out of faster-than-light travel in a formation no one had seen before. Their ships were different, angular and dark, covered in what looked like black glass that seemed to drink in the light from the system's star. There were only 30 vessels, but they moved with inhuman precision, each one linked to the others in a way that made them function as a single organism. The Salathi defense fleet moved to engage, but before they could fire their first salvo, the human ships simply vanished. Not jumped away, vanished. For 3 seconds the sensors showed nothing. Then the human vessels reappeared inside the defense perimeter, their weapons already firing. The weapons themselves were new. No missiles, no railguns. Instead, beams of something that looked like concentrated void tore through the Salathi ships. Armor meant nothing. Shields buckled and collapsed. Where the beams touched, matter simply ceased to exist, leaving perfectly smooth holes in the hulls. The defense fleet died without landing a single hit. Then the human ships turned toward the planet. Every transmitter on Ephra 3 broadcast the same message in perfect Salathi: "You chose to betray us. You chose to sell us to our enemies. This is the price." The beams lanced down from orbit, carving through the research facilities with terrifying precision. They didn't target civilian centers, not yet. They systematically destroyed every military installation, every government building, every piece of infrastructure that made the colony functional. And then, just as suddenly as they'd appeared, the human ships jumped away. The message they left behind was clear: we can reach you anywhere. We can destroy you whenever we want. And this is just the beginning. Oryvex watched the footage of the attack 3 times before its suit registered dangerous fluctuations in its emotional state. The beings it had dismissed as broken prey had just torn through a defended colony world like it was made of paper. "Get me Admiral Chin," it said quietly. "We need to negotiate." "The humans aren't responding to any transmissions," its aide replied. Oryvex's tendrils curled inward, a gesture of deep fear among its kind. Of course they weren't responding. Why would they? The time for talking was over. The reckoning. Admiral Chin stood in the observation deck of the Prometheus, watching the stars stream past as the fleet moved through faster-than-light travel. Behind her, the tactical hologram displayed their next target: a Vakrine mining operation in the Helix Nebula, staffed by military personnel who had been at Tertian Junction, who had watched humanity burn and done nothing. Captain Rodriguez approached, his footsteps echoing on the metal floor. He'd survived the Indomitable's destruction by being blown clear in an escape pod, spending 3 days drifting in space before rescue found him. The experience had changed him, made him harder. "The crew is asking questions," he said quietly, "about how far we're going to take this." Chin didn't turn away from the viewport. "How far would you take it, Captain?" Rodriguez was silent for a moment. "They killed 94% of our fleet. They murdered our people while pretending to be our allies. They sold us to monsters for their own convenience." He paused. "I'd take it as far as it needs to go." "Good. Because we're not stopping until they understand what they've done." The fleet had grown in the months since Ephra 3. Not in numbers, humanity still had fewer ships than any of the major powers, but in capability. The new vessels were smaller, faster, built around technology that Earth's scientists had been developing in secret for years. Technology they'd hidden even from their allies back when they'd had allies. The quantum displacement drives allowed the ships to phase through normal space for brief moments, appearing and disappearing like ghosts. The void cannons used controlled antimatter reactions to erase matter at the molecular level. And the neural network linking every ship meant they fought not as individuals but as a perfect coordinated whole, reacting faster than any organic crew could manage. But the real weapon wasn't the technology. It was the fury. Every human crew member had lost someone at Tertian Junction. Friends, family, lovers. The betrayal had cut deep, turned grief into rage, rage into cold determination. They didn't fight for glory or territory. They fought for justice. For revenge. For the simple primal need to make the galaxy understand that humanity could not be discarded like trash. The Vakrine mining operation never saw them coming. One moment the facility was processing asteroids, its workers going about their routine. The next, 30 human ships materialized inside the defensive perimeter. The void cannon spoke once, twice, 3 times. The military barracks, the command center, the weapons platforms, all simply ceased to exist, replaced by perfectly spherical voids. Chin opened a channel to the remaining facility staff. Her face appeared on every screen, calm and cold. "You have 10 minutes to evacuate," she said. "Get to your escape pods and jump for the nearest system. If you're still here when the time expires, you die with the facility." A Vakreen supervisor appeared on the return channel, his plates pale with fear. "Please, we're just miners. We weren't at Tertian Junction. We didn't." "Your empire made a choice," Chin interrupted. "Every Vakreen benefits from that choice. Every Vakreen shares the responsibility." 10 minutes. The channel cut. Chin watched as the escape pods began launching, dozens of them fleeing into the dark. She could have destroyed them. Part of her wanted to. But that wasn't the point. The point was the message. 9 minutes later, the facility was empty. At exactly 10 minutes, the human fleet reduced it to atoms. Across the galaxy, the pattern repeated. The Krell lost supply depots, command stations, patrol bases. The Sulathi watched as their trade nexuses went dark, their carefully maintained monopolies crumbling. The Vakreen found their mining operations destroyed, their resource chains disrupted. But humanity was careful. Surgical. They didn't target civilians directly, didn't bomb population centers or massacre refugees. They dismantled military infrastructure with precision, cutting away the foundations of power while leaving just enough survivors to spread the word. "We are coming. We cannot be stopped. And we will never forgive." The galactic news networks couldn't ignore it anymore. Humanity's return from apparent defeat became the dominant story across 100 worlds. Some called it terrorism. Others called it justice. But everyone called it terrifying. In the Vakreen Imperial Palace, Thras watched another report of a destroyed outpost and felt his certainty crumble. General Karvik sat across from him, mandibles clicking nervously. "We need to mobilize the full fleet," Karvik said. "Hunt them down before." "Before what?" Thras snapped. "Before they destroy more targets? We've tried hunting them, General. They appear, strike, and vanish before our ships can even get a target lock. Their technology is beyond anything we've seen. Then we negotiate. Offer reparations, territory. They're not responding to any transmissions. They don't want to talk." Thras stood, pacing the chamber. "We thought we were being pragmatic. The Krell were going to win eventually, so we made a deal. Sacrifice the humans to save ourselves. It seemed logical." "It was logical," Karvik insisted. "No. It was cowardice. And now we're paying for it." On Earth, Fleet Admiral Zhao reviewed the latest operational reports in his office deep beneath the Himalayas. The command center around him buzzed with activity, analysts tracking fleet movements, engineers developing new weapon systems, strategists planning the next phase. Captain Singh entered, saluting crisply. She'd been promoted to Zhao's personal staff after her role in warning Earth of the betrayal. "Sir, we're getting reports that the Vakreen Council wants to open negotiations. They're offering full reparations, technology sharing, formal apologies." Zhao didn't look up from his screens. "Tell them we're not interested." "Sir, some of the civilian government thinks we should at least listen. We've made our point. We could." "Could what?" Zhao finally met her eyes. "Could forgive them? Could pretend that saying sorry brings back the 197 ships they helped destroy? The 73,000 people who died at Tertian Junction?" Singh said nothing. She understood the anger. Shared it. But she also worried about where it would lead. Zhao's expression softened slightly. "I know what you're thinking, Captain. That revenge has a cost. That if we're not careful, we'll become the monsters we're fighting against." He turned back to his screens. "Maybe we will. But right now, the galaxy needs to learn a lesson it's forgotten. Humanity is not prey. We are not convenient sacrifices. And when you betray us, there is always a reckoning." The human fleet moved to its next target, and the next, and the next. Each strike more devastating than the last. Each message clearer than the one before. In the Krell war chambers, the war chiefs argued about how to respond. In the Sulathi councils, advisors debated whether to abandon their allies and sue for separate peace. In the Vakreen palace, Thras stared at star charts and tried to find a solution that wouldn't end with his empire in ruins. But in the observation deck of the Prometheus, Admiral Chin simply watched